Hello class. Today we're going to talk about the Pythagorean Theorem. So what is the Pythagorean Theorem? Well, it's mainly this. It says in a right triangle, the sum of the squares of the lengths of the legs is equal to the square of the length of the hypotenuse. So the Pythagorean Theorem only works with right triangles. Okay, and the Pythagorean Theorem is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So what that means is looking at the legs of the triangle, and we know the legs of the triangle are the two sides that actually make up the right angle. This right angle will always touch the two legs, the a and the b. This c is known as the hypotenuse, and it will always be the longest side of the triangle. So what does this mean? In a right triangle, the sum of the squares of the lengths of the legs is equal to the square of the length of the hypotenuse. Well, let's see. Let's draw this out and try to understand this. So here's a right triangle. And in this right triangle, I'm going to label this side A. I'm going to label this side B. Those are my two legs because they are the two pieces that are touched by the right angle. This third side will be known as the hypotenuse, or the C. Now, I put the letters on the inside for a reason. What the Pythagorean theorem says is that if I take the length of this side, which is A, and I create a square using that side. Well, we know a square would be the same length this way as it is this way. So if I create a square using those dimensions, so if I said that this was length A, this over here is going to be length A, so its square would be A squared. Okay, so if I use actual numbers with that, if I said that this side here was 3, then this side right here would be 3. So if I square that, I get 9. Okay? So if I do this leg, and if I do the same thing with this other leg that I did with that one, is I take the square of this one, so this would be B and this would be B, or if I actually use numbers, let's say this would be 4, this would be 4, we would have an area of 16. So it says if I take the square of this leg and the square of this leg, and I add those two together, you will always get the square of the hypotenuse. Okay, so this says I've got 9 and 16, so that means this square would be equal to 25. Okay, so in this one I did 3 times 3 to get 9. This one I did 4 times 4 to get 16. So what number could I multiply by itself to get 25? Well, that would be the length of C, which in this case would be 5. That would be a 5 by 5 square. So the Pythagorean theorem says that if I take the square of the leg and the square of the other leg, add those together, that will always give me the square of the hypotenuse. That's what this a squared plus b squared equals c squared is all about. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to show you a little video demonstrating this example. Okay, so let me minimize this, and we're going to play this little video right here. Okay, this is called the water video. You'll notice we've got water in this leg and water in this leg. Those are the two legs. And all that water from those two sides pours out and fills the hypotenuse square. Kind of neat, huh? Now they do it in reverse. So all the water from the hypotenuse square will come back in and fill the leg squares. And that's the model of the Pythagorean theorem. Now let's see if we can actually do a couple questions. Okay. So here's our first one. It says use the Pythagorean theorem to find the missing measure. So in this particular shape, I have a right triangle, and I know two pieces of the triangle, and I'm looking for the third. Those are the two conditions that you must have in order to use the Pythagorean theorem. So the first thing I want you to do is write the theorem down. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. Okay, now we do our math. Okay, so I plug in. Okay, so I'm going to let this one here be a, and I'm going to plug in my 12 squared. Okay, then I'm going to let the other leg be b. So this leg is going to be the b, so 16 squared. And that's going to equal c squared. Now we just do our math. So we take our calculator and we do 12 squared, and we get 144. Then we do 16 squared, and we get 256. And that's equal to c squared. So what the Pythagorean theorem says is that if I take the square of the first side, of the leg and add it to the square of the second leg, I will get the sum of what c squared is. Okay? So if I add those together, I get 400. Now what I need to do is I need to turn a c squared into just a c. So like we did in this previous problem, okay, 3 times 3 gave me 9, 4 times 4 gave me 16. So what number times itself would give me 25? Well, the way we do that is we just take the square root of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the square root of c squared, because I need to turn c squared into a c, because I know the square root of c times c is c. And I take the square root of 400, and I end up with 20. So in this case, my c is equal to 20 centimeters. And that's an example of how you use the Pythagorean theorem to find the hypotenuse. You'll notice we write the formula down, we plug in our two legs, and we add them together. Okay, because if I add the square of a and the square of b, I add that together, that gives me what the square of c equals. Okay, now, what if one of my legs is missing? What if one of the legs is missing? Well, we do the same basic thing. We start off with our formula. Okay, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Because I know two of the pieces and I'm looking for the third. Again, it's a right triangle and I'm missing that third side. So that tells us that yes, I can use the Pythagorean theorem. So now I look at this 5, so I'm going to let it be a because it says that b is missing. So I write 5 squared plus I don't know b, so I leave it as b squared. And I know c, so I plug in my hypotenuse and I'm going to square it. So now we do our math. 5 squared is 25. I don't know b yet, that's what I'm looking for, so I leave it as b squared. And then I do 13 squared, which is 169. So now we go back to our algebra and think, okay, I need to get b by itself. Okay, so to do that, I need to get rid of this 25. So we're going to subtract 25 from this side. And if I subtract 25 from one side, I got to subtract 25 from the other. So now my 25s go away, and I'm left with b squared is equal to 144. Well, I know that b, I don't want b squared, and I know this can't be 144. So what do I have to do? I take the square root of both sides, and b is equal to 12, and in this case, 12 centimeters. So what we've looked at is we've looked at an example where I'm using the Pythagorean theorem to find the hypotenuse. And when we do that, we're going to add our squares together. But whenever I'm looking for a leg and I know the hypotenuse, then I know I'm going to have to use my algebra to get the b by itself, because we've got to have this variable by itself, because that's what I'm looking for. And that's what the Pythagorean theorem is all about. So in a right triangle, must be a right triangle, the sum of the squares of the lengths of the legs, a squared plus b squared, is equal to the square of the length of the hypotenuse, which is c squared. And that's how you work the Pythagorean theorem.